In this video, we're going to cover how to use a joint as a control to drive an arm and why it could be a better solution for animation. I'm going to start this video off with a caveat. You may have seen this video before. This is probably the third time I've uploaded it and probably the 10th time I've recorded it. This is a rather new technique to me, and I keep stumbling upon techniques that will work for one rig, but then not for another. Um, and I'm still trying to figure out the nuance of what's changed between the setups to make it work for one and not the other. Uh, I posted this last time and got some comments that it wasn't working for people, and I believe I had to change my workflow at work also to work for a certain rig I was making there. So I apologize. I'm still trying to figure this out myself, but I think I've got it here. It seems to be working fairly consistently when I try it now. The main difference I could think of here is I had straight forearms and wrists before, so the wrist was aligned the same as the forearm. So I've got that rotated. We'll see if that makes a difference here, but um, like I said, this seems to be working for me on multiple rigs now, and hopefully it will for you guys too. So jumping into the video here, we've got three different rigs. We've got group 1, 2, and 3 if you're following along in the outliner here. And I'm going to go through the different setups and end on what we're talking about, but kind of go through why we're doing this. So the first setup here is, if you watch it in my other videos, is kind of the default setup I have. This is what I use for years as far as my setup, but there's a drawback to it. So what I've done here is I've got my regular control with a group node above it. The group node is what initially got parent constrained to this joint to move it to and orient it the same way as the joint. So like if I look at the wrist here and go to rotation, you see my gimbal here, and if I look at my control, it is lined up the exact same way. There's no change. Whoops. There's no change between those two. So it's a one-to-one rotation. So whatever this thing rotates, that thing rotates the same amount, and the control. Whoops. Let's make sure we're rotating the right part there. Uh, whatever I rotate here, this is zeroed out, and so is the joint. So those values are the same. I'm going to get the same rotation, same animation. I'm not really at risk for gimbal lock, at least between the control and the joint. They're going to, if one does lock up, the other should lock up too. And so the motion should stay the same. On top of that, I have mirroring rotations between those, which is nice. The downside to this setup is my translation. Is if we select these one by one, because of how the joints are oriented to get the mirroring rotation, means Z is down in this case, but it's up over here. So like if I grab both controllers and try to move them both in Z, they go opposite directions, which is frustrating because you're getting, for the same value, you're getting different motions, which gets even more confusing in the graph editor. Because one curve, if you're going up here, is going to go up in a curve like this, and this arm for the same value, going up in a curve like this is actually going down. So it's not particularly intuitive. To get it to go up the same way, I need a curve that goes the opposite direction in the graph editor. So for an animator, if you're trying to get similar motion on both sides, like say, character holding something, that starts to get a little bit more confusing. So that brings us to option 2 of, well, what if we want translation that stays together? And in this rig, we have that. And I'll go ahead and close this one and open up group 2. And how do we do that? Kind of the opposite. So what we do is we orient our hand controls still. Basically, you take the same setup. So parent constrain the group to the joint to get it in place, gets the controller in place, but then I unparent the control, zero out the control group, and then parent the control back in and freeze transformations to get rid of the rotation values in. So what that means is we now have a control group that is lined up to the world, so our translation is good, but now we traded our rotation for that. And now if I want to do a simple twist of the wrist, I've got to use 3 directions now, and that's not intuitive. If I want to twist my wrist, I want one axis like that. So the question is there a way to get the best of both worlds? And for the longest time, I thought there was not until I came across this technique that somebody else had done. And all I have is their rig. I have no idea how they set it up, and it still looks a little bit different than mine. But I tried to mirror all the settings I could find on theirs, and it didn't work for all the rigs that I get. Um, and essentially, what they do is they would rotate, do the same thing I was doing on that first controller, but they would then have the opposite joint orient value for the rotation value. Actually, I'm jumping ahead. This control is actually a joint. Um, it is a joint that has a curve shape assigned to it, so it looks like a control and it has the bone node hidden. But what that does is it gives us joint orient values and rotate axis values on top of that. So we have a way to line up the rotations, but then to offset those rotations to get us translation. If you look at this thing, we have, let's go back to our channel box. We have logical X, Y, and Z. So if you're trying to figure out directions, it's the same for either controller. But on top of that, we also have mirroring rotations. So we have here the best of both worlds and graph curves that make sense for animators. That if they want to move the hands in, that's the same direction for the curve would go up, or I guess in this case down on both of these because that's going to be inside. So we have a logic here that we didn't have before with the other two setups. So how do we do this? So to do this, we'll go ahead and modify our first rig because it's basically the same setup. It's just some extra steps from here. So what I'm going to do is I'll start here on the left hand and then we'll do the right hand again just so you can see it twice. I'm going to duplicate this wrist joint. This is going to become our control. Let's get focused in here so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control D and duplicate my wrist. I'll have a second wrist here, and I'm going to parent it under the original wrist. And what I'm going to do is create a locator now and move it on over here. So what I'm doing is this wrist that I've duplicated will have the same joint orientation as the wrist itself. It's going to have that. So if I unparent it here, you can see it has joint orient values that are assigned to it because it's now in world space. That is keeping it in that direction. So however, everything is pointing down, kind of oriented the same way the control is. We want to keep that. Let me go ahead and put that back. We want to keep that, but we want to get rotate axis values that are relative to this wrist. And what we're going to do is we're going to straighten this out and orient it back to world. And we want the rotation values and joint orient values relative to that. So we want it under the wrist as we're doing that. So what I'm going to do is I've made this locator here, and it's not part of the rig. It's just something oriented to the world that I could select. It could be any object as long as it's oriented to the world. I'm going to select it. I'm going to select my duplicate wrist joint that I made. Constrain orient, and I'm going to double check and make sure that I have maintain offset not on. We don't want that checked on. Go ahead and add that. And now your wrist is sticking off to the side. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and unparent that. I'm going to delete that constraint. Oh, there's two constraints there because there's the original constraint from duplicating the first wrist that was orient constrained to that control. But we're just going to delete both those. We don't need the end of that. We just want the wrist joint because that's going to be our control now. And you can see it's oriented to the world. We still got the joint orient values on it, but it's rotated now. It's facing a different direction. So if we look at our rotation gimbal, it's also rotated that direction. What we want to do is we want to take these rotation values and move them to the rotate axis values. Rotate axis is kind of like a counter to rotate. And well, let's just do it. You'll see. So I'm copying those values from rotate and pasting them into the rotate axis. and then zeroing out the rotation values. And so you can see this doesn't affect our joint orient value. So as far as our joint is oriented, it's still oriented the same way the wrist was before. So again, if I switch back and forth between those, you don't see that move. So what did rotate axis do? If I grab the right joint, what did that do? That offset from our joint orient rotation to get us back oriented the same way that locator was. So basically we just rotated things back to, here's it oriented with the arm. Now, how much do we need to rotate it back to get it lined up with the world is what we did by constraining it, and then we move those back to the rotate axis values, and then we still have clean rotations. So now we have something that's oriented to the world as far as translation, but oriented to the joint as far as rotation. And you can only get that through a joint as far as I know. I don't think I could do that with a group node because I don't have the joint orient values. So here's our good starting point. I'm going to go find my control now. So here it is. And I'm going to parent it under the joint here. And let's see. I'm going to, we're going to throw this control away in a second. We just want the shape node out of it. So I'm just going to stick a 1 behind that to make it a unique name, and I'm going to copy its name and paste it onto this wrist joint because that's going to be our new control. And I'm just doing this so there's a unique name because I need to use scripting here in a second to move that shape node, and I need unique names or it won't work. Okay, so I'm going to start typing in our script to move a shape node from one object to another. So that script is parent -s for shape, and I am totally forgetting what the second part is now that I am saying this out loud. I think it's -r. I think that's for relative. And you can look at this up in your mel commands. But parent shape relative, and then I need the shape node here. So I'm going to go back to my channel box. Not this name. This is the object name. So like if we turn on shapes, you can see how there's the shape node, there's the object node. Basically, we want to move this under the joint, and unfortunately, you can't just drag that under here. It doesn't quite work that way. If there is, somebody leave me a comment. I'd love to know that, but I've never been able to do that. So we're going to do it through a script. So yeah, you can turn on shape nodes there and copy the name, but I just select the object of the channel box and copy it over here. And paste that in. And that shape node is just the geometry under here. If you're unfamiliar, shape node is the geometry, object is all the channel attributes and stuff you see in the attribute editor and all that stuff. Okay, so we copied the shape name. We're going to copy the control name, put in a space. So parent, shape, relative, the shape name, and then the object you want to parent it under. Hit enter. Oh, and it moved. And the reason why it moved was I still have rotations on it. It's parenting it relative, and this thing isn't rotated. So it rotated itself to be oriented the same way that thing is rotated. So I need a first freeze transformations, which is why I parented it under here in the first place. We'll do this in the right order on the next step. Let's see. Oh, also you're seeing my wrist move there because it's still orient constrained to the original control. We'll fix that in a second. We'll do the right hand in the right order here. Okay, so we'll do parent. Let me just type. Well, no, I'm going to be lazy. It's in my script editor here. Yep, that's the thing I undid. Copy that. So parent shape relative -s -r shape, and then the object. Let's try that again. That's better. It didn't move. And okay, you can see our joint now looks like a control here, and our control node's empty. I'm going to go ahead and delete that and get our joint snapped back because there was nothing it was orient constrained to anymore. So here's our new control. Before we parent it back under its control group, you may notice translate is oriented to the world now. Our original control wasn't. We want to make that oriented the world now. Otherwise, we're going to end up with, not with rotations, but we're going to end up with, when you translate X, Y, and Z, it's going to be relative to that group, not to the control. So zero that out first, then parent the control back there. And again, just zero out the rotations, not the translations. We want it to still stay right there. Okay, so here's our control. So you might notice we still got a joint icon still there. Let's go ahead and turn that off. If I go in the attribute editor, under here, joint draw style, it says bone currently, and we're just going to turn that to none. And now it just looks like a regular control. And again, we get the best of both worlds. We got world orientation. We got our joint orient that's lined the same way. If I grab this joint now, grab the hand control, add a constraint on here, again, you'll see there's no maintain offset on. Click apply, and it stays right in place. The rotation's lined up, but we still get world values. And let's go ahead and do that again on the other side here. So let's see, we'll hide the left side, show the right side, and I'll duplicate my wrist. And I'm actually going to delete my orient constraints now. And still got my locator here. So I'm going to parent my duplicate wrist under my original. I'm going to grab my locator, grab my duplicate joint that I just made, orient constrain it to my locator, and delete that orient constraint. And let's see, next I need to, I'm going to go ahead and delete that hand joint, the extra hand joint I don't need. Going to unparent it. Let's see, what do I need to do next? Right, I need to move the rotate values to the rotate axis values. Zero out the rotation values after doing that. Let's double check this. This looks right. Okay, yep. Yep, okay, so rotation looks good, translation looks good. I need to do, move the control now. And I'm not sure if oh no, that's, I made those backwards. Wrong control number one, but number two, I selected my stuff backwards when I orient constrained them. Thing you want it to follow first, thing that you want to follow the first things you selected last. Constrain oriented. Okay, there. Close that. I really am all over the place on the first one, but if you guys think I know a lot for some reason, this is how I often work, making mistakes like that and go and fix them as I go. I'm not always the most detail-oriented person when it comes to looking through a big list like this and remembering selection orders and stuff. Okay, so anyway, if you're making mistakes, don't feel bad. I do it all the time too. So right hand, we want to parent under this new wrist joint. Let's freeze rotations now so we don't forget that. That's zeroed out under there. Let's fix the name so we won't have clashing names when we do the script. I'm going to copy that name first, add a 1 at the end, and then paste that name into my joint because that's going to be my new hand control. And we'll use our handy script again, parent, shape, relative. I think that's dash relative. I could be wrong on that, but dash R is the part that matters. What it stands for doesn't particularly mean. Again, you can look it up in the Maya help. Paste in our shape name, copy our object name, put in a space, paste in our object name, hit enter. Oh, more than one object. Okay, well this is because I have 3 groups and I probably missed renaming one, so I'm just going to add a 3 at the end of this real quick. All right, hand control shape. Oh, is it that? No. All right, let's call this 2. This is probably not something you're going to run into unless you have duplicate names all over your thing. I thought I had renamed stuff to not run into this name clashing issue before this, but I must have missed one. So we're just going to change some names until that works. Great. And then I'll change them back because it doesn't matter. now because I'm not scripting anything else. Oh, that's why. No, this is hand one. Yeah, anyway, whatever. That's irrelevant. That's because of my scene and having 3 duplicate rigs in here and trying to work on them and apparently missing a rename. Okay, so I've got my hand control set up right. I need to zero out the rotations on my CT group. And that's zeroed out, that's lined up. And now I can, let's do it in the right order this time. Hand control, then the joint, constrain, orient. And then we've also got my IK handles here. I'm going to point constrain them to my controller. I'm hitting the G key to redo the last command on my keyboard to speed things up. Let's test this out now. If I grab that, yep, moving the same direction. Rotation's mirroring. So, and let's go ahead and turn off that bone icon. There we go. So that is how to set up your hand controls or whatever controls you want to have world orientation for translate, but be oriented to the joint for rotation and have clean graph curves that will line up with everything still and not cause gimbal lock and be sensible as far as the graph curves to your animator. So give that a try, guys. Let me know if that works for you. If you got some new technique that works for you, or you know something about this that I don't, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear about it. If you're having trouble, let me know too, and I'll see if I can help you out with it. So hopefully that's some new information for you guys, and thanks for watching.